Hello, Tommy Plays with Fiber Patreon members. Today we are going to be making the Holiday Bloom, which is a foundation paper piece pattern that I developed in collaboration with my good friend Jen Beeman from GrainLine Studio. Basically what happened is we saw a free block that someone made. We all didn't really like it, so we were like, we'll redesign it ourselves. So we kind of did a little bit, redesigned it, and then I was like, I'll just make it into a pattern. So here I am showing you how to make it today. The cool thing about this pattern is we've also developed a little banner to go with it. So this is it's not finished there, but pardon me, we will see that we'll make the block, and then we will add these pieces around it to make a banner that we can hang up on the wall for the holiday. And so one more thing I wanted to say about this is that this is loosely based on a plant that most people know as the poinsettia. It has a different indigenous name, and the name poinsettia was taken from a colonizer who took it back with him to Europe and basically made his entire life fortune on it. So I'm calling it Holiday Bloom because it can be whatever you want it to be. I based it on this plant that has a little bit of a history, so just know that people are calling it different names. The indigenous name I cannot pronounce, and I think some people are calling it like Mexican fire star. Sorry about that, I think Siri came on in the background. Anyway, so this is the Holiday Bloom, this is the block, and then there's also a banner project that I'm going to show you how to do here. So yeah, let's go ahead and get started. First, you're going to print off your templates, which are here. You're going to print 4 of this page, and then you're going to rough cut around each of those templates. If you want to make sure that your sizing is correct, you can measure this square for accuracy. If it is smaller or larger, you'll want to check your print settings to make sure that you're printing at 100%. Also, just before we move on with this cutting, I'm not going to show you the cutting here, but I will. This is included in the pattern to show you how, if you only have 1 FQ of your background fabric for the block, this is how you fit all the pieces on the block. If you're going to use the same background fabric as the block as you do as the banner, you'll need about a yard extra for the banner. You'll need a yard total for the banner. You can make all the banner pieces from a ½ yard of yardage, but that's an additional piece. So let's start with the block. Color-wise, I just wanted to say, to pick your colors, you're going to want 2 greens for leaves, 1 lighter, 1 darker, and then 2 reds for the petals, which are going to be also 1 lighter, 1 darker. And then if you are going to have a yellow middle, you can do that in 1 color. And yeah, I also recommend that when you go through and put these colors in position, you keep an eye on that it's been designed so that the lighter leaf is next to the darker petal. So dark should always be next to lights. And so keep that in mind as you're going through so that you don't mess up. A couple more things to note on the templates here is that each template shows you which color is on it in the sewing order. So we're going to sew 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, 4 to 5, and this group to 6. And so you see here it says C and D. Those correspond to the colors here in your cutting chart. So we're going to make 4 each of these templates. I have them here. I've already rough cut them out along with all my pieces that I've cut. And we're going to sew them together just like we normally would with a foundation paper piecing setup. So that's not in the instructions. I expect you to know that if you're going to be doing an FPP pattern. There's also a lot of tutorials online. I have one to follow in some of my free patterns, which you can find at TommyPlaysWithFiber.com. And so I'm just going to go ahead and start sewing here on template 1. And the pieces I need for that are 4 of these backgrounds. I need my yellow triangles. Oh, and I forgot to cut a piece. So hold on, let me cut those pieces real quick. Okay, now I'm prepared. Apologies for that. So I'm going to follow these templates, keeping in mind that my color B is red and my color A is dark red. So this number 4, so I'm going to put it in the 4th order. Number 1 is my background piece and 2 is this piece. So if I follow my sewing order and follow these in order, I should be good to go. And I'm going to put my machine on a 1.5, and I have a clear foot on my machine so that I can see right that I'm stitching right on the line there. So we'll take our first piece. Remember, the right side faces out on our first piece. We want to cover that whole area of section 1. And then we'll take one of these. In this case, I'm going to center it. For triangles in this, center them usually. And that is going to be perfect. So I'll sew that. I'm going to do that for each piece. Okay, now standard to foundation paper piecing, I'm going to fold back, trim to 1/4 inch, and you always fold back from the piece you're moving toward. So we're moving toward 2 in the first one, so I'm going to fold back on the seam moving toward 2 and trim that. And this is before we press, always before you press. If you press open and do this, you will chop off the piece of fabric that you just sewed on. And that is a bummer. I'm using my really sharp fabric scissors here. They are never for paper. I have another pair that is for paper, and it has a blue marker on here, so I can always, when I hold it, I can even feel that it's not the correct one for fabric. Okay. I'm going to press these. Okay, so 1 and 2 are together on the center template. Next, we're going to sew on 3 and 4. Because they're not connected to each other here, we can actually sew them on at the same time. We'll just want to make sure that we're not sewing over one when we stick the other one on. So I'll show you that now. They're triangles. So in our sewing order, 3 is next. I'm going to center that on the piece and sew it. Maybe just, I'm going to chain sew these so that I don't get anything out of order. So I'm going to center my triangle again. Don't forget to clean up your strap. And then lastly, we're going to put on this piece in section 4. Stop there. Really do your best to center it again. Okay, now we have our completed pieces here. And I'm going to sew the other ones before I do it, but we will trim to this dotted line. And as long as fabric is covering all of that dotted line, you'll have a completed piece. And then we'll sew the templates together to form the full block. So do this on the rest of the blocks. Nothing on here is too complicated. It's all squares and triangles. all rectangles and triangles, so straight edges, triangles, and then just follow that same order. So we're going to start on this. I'm going to put on some music because I don't need to talk to you about this. But so now I have my completed templates. I am going to flip them over now and trim with the scissors that I use for paper and fabric at the same time. This is a special pair. And I'm going to trim on the dotted line along each of these sides, okay? You can also do this with a rotary cutter and a ruler. These are all straight edges, so you can do that nice and easy that way. I just don't really feel like it right now, so I'm just going to cut them by hand. Just to show you how much easier this would be if you did it with a ruler. Okay, so now we're going to follow our instructions by connecting first the center templates to each other with the yellow points touching, and then connecting those two units to each other like so. Then we're going to add on 2 side petals, making sure to align those colors there. And then to that, we'll make 2 other units that have the other petals and the leaves coming off of those. And then we'll assemble those strips together into the almost complete block until we put the edge around it. So follow along with me as I do that. I'm going to be using a 1/4-inch foot on my machine. This guy, my favorite. I'm also going to be using a stitch length of 1.0. This is to help knock the papers off. And this is to help knock the papers off after we sew the seam. We'll pull them off, and that nice short stitch length will help us get it right off. So let's lay this out. Okay. I'm not going to pin these. I'm just going to make sure that they look nice and aligned and that they sort of nest into each other. So I'm looking at how that pinches in right there. And that's going to be aligned. And in the actual sewing, you want to make sure that your stitching is going on this line of the template. This line right here is where your needle should be going through. Peel these papers off. Just the seam. Then I'll go press those open. Okay, and now that I'm going to be putting these two pieces together, I'm going to put a pin where the seams meet. And ideally, these other seams will meet on that same line. And it looks like they do. Pull our seams again, just the seam papers, and go press that open again. Well, I messed up my own pattern, so follow my own instructions to get the A and B there. I did this wrong, so it's all right. Go ahead and sew these two pieces on. Okay, looks like I only did one of them wrong. Okay, so now that we have our completed foundation paper piece, we're going to set aside our strips on either side. I'm going to put the strips on top that are, oops, that one's flipped over. So is that one. Just going to orient these the way I want them. Perfect. Okay, so now I'm just going to sew, like this image shows, we're going to sew the strips, well, I'm going to sew it to the top and bottom, just because of how I want it to be oriented, but it doesn't matter. Just sew them to opposite sides, press them open, then sew the next strips to the opposite sides as well. Then we'll be ready to go. So let me do that real quick. I'm still using a stitch length of 1, and I'm still using my 1/4 inch foot. And so you can either press these open or out. I'm going to go with out, actually, because of how dense that is right there. Okay, now that we've pressed those out, see that I just pressed them out instead of open. We can sew on our other strips. So we'll just match up one end. We'll center it the best we can. But recall, this 12.5 inches is our final measurement, so we do want to make sure that we're fitting it within that dimension. Okay, one more on the other side. And if you got to an edge here and it didn't quite get all the way in, just make sure that you align the other strip on the opposite side in line with that, because that's what we're going to be trimming to. And I sewed that on the wrong side. Okay, and so there's our bordered block. block. We can trim this to 12.5 inches. I'm going to pull the papers off first, and then we're going to press it again. Sometimes the papers hold a little bit of tension. They're foundation, that's what they're supposed to do. Okay, so other than my little mishap here, we have a completed Holiday Bloom block. And from here, I would take my 12.5-inch ruler and trim it to 12.5 inches, or use it however I please. I'm going to trim this here. Continue with this video if you want to see how we turn this into a banner. If you don't want to see that, that's totally fine. You can just end it here and make the block. Yeah, no other instructions here. Everything ends up on a square grid, so it's pretty easy to match your points. And just try to be careful about which sides you put your triangles on in these pieces, okay? And actually, in this case, I put it on correctly in this piece. I didn't put it on correctly in this piece. So just be careful with what you do there. I really like the colors I chose for this. I love the spiral that this created in the middle. I love the leafiness of this green texture. And I also love that this piece ended up here because it kind of looks like a little snowflake just landed right on there. All right, so continue with the video if you want to see how we turn this into a banner. Otherwise, you're good to go. Thanks for watching. Okay, so if we're going to continue making this block into the banner that you'll see in the pattern, I'm going to go ahead and just trim this block to 12.5 inches square. That's what we have to start with. So really you could make this banner with any 12.5 inch square block you want to put in the middle. In this case, we're just using this one. Because it's a Christmassy themed banner. I think I'm going to give this one to my grandma because she really, really likes red flowers, and she really likes red flowers at Christmas. So I've trimmed to 12.5 inches square. That's my starting block size. I'm going to move the camera out real quick so I can show you how I cut the pieces. Okay, so easy peasy. I'm going to save the back for last. And with our block, we're going to align it the way we want it. I want my mistake pointing down. Although, I actually want my mistake pointing up. I think that's what I've decided. So, you can lay your 12.5 inch strips on either side, top and bottom, and then your long, thin strips are going to go on either side of that after you've stitched it and pressed those seams open. And then our triangle will go on the bottom. So, I'll stitch that together now, and I'm going to press all the seams open in this. So we'll stitch that. I'll stitch this together now. I'm going to press all the seams open after I stitch them. Still using my 1/4 inch foot. Okay, now that we put the top and bottom on, we can add the side pieces. the same way we did before. It's just normal square piecing. Well, rectangle piecing. Okay, and here's our front piece. So I'm going to go ahead and sew the back piece, and then I'll show you how to cut the batting and how to stitch it all together. So I have my backing piece here, and I have my backing triangle as well. And what I'm going to do with that is just what we did before, center it on the bottom. The points might not all the way reach, but in all likelihood they'll reach just a little bit. So now I'm going to stitch this down. Press that seam open. Okay, and now that we have the backing done, I'm going to trim off these corners just a little bit. Let's make sure that our front is relatively the same size. It looks like it's just a little bit wider. But what we'll do is match this point here. If it ends up a little wide, you can flip it and just trim it. So I have a little bit extra over here. Just gonna cut off. Okay, and now our pieces should be the same size. So because they're aligned, I'm going to stick a pin in. Let's stick two in, actually. I'm going to set this aside. So we also need to cut a piece of batting. So my batting roll here, we need to cut a piece that is tall enough to encompass all of that. I think that should be good. And so with this batting, it was actually in a double layer, so I cut the batting for my next one. I trim it. Okay. So, as shown in your instructions, I'm going to lie this all out flat. Actually, I'm going to put the batting on top of this sandwich. So we have our top on top, backing on back, right sides together. We're going to lay this batting so that it covers all the edges. Now we'll flip it over and let's stick some pins in. You can pin it pretty heavily. Especially helps around the edges. Because we're going to trim this batting to the edge. Okay, I'm going to stick one in the middle too. So all the layers should be well attached, and that looks to be true. I'm going to take my good shears, and I'm just going to trim all the way around. And this is going to become our sewing edge. Okay, and just to make sure that we're getting a full seam all the way around this, I've suggested a, I need to trim this still too. I've suggested a seam allowance of 1/2 inch here. If you choose a different one, it's not going to make that big of a difference. It'll just make your final piece a little bit bigger or smaller. And then one last thing I'm going to do is mark a dot up here. Make sure there's enough room for my hand to fit through to turn. And then another dot. We're going to start on each of these and sew all the way around back to the other dot. And we're going to be using a wider seam gauge, seam allowance. So we need a different foot. Okay, I'm going to start at the dot, work my way all the way around 1/2 inch. 1/2 inch seam allowance. Okay? Pivot when you reach a corner. And backstitch at the beginning. Just so we can fold that under when we get there. What I'm going to say now is to trim your corners to the seam. Every corner here. Okay. Now we'll turn it inside out. We'll get our handy dandy point turner for our corners. Remember, you want to fold, turn it inside out from this pocket so the batting becomes encased. Keep saying this pocket. It's the space between the backing and the front that are right sides together. sort of like a pillowcase. I didn't really trim my seams. That's okay. You don't have to. You can make a better edge if you're going to stitch down a certain. Okay, so you just want to make sure all those edges are as flat as you can get them. So I recommend just kind of like stretching it out just a little bit. Trim any loose threads you see. And then this little section, you can just turn under, and we will press that and hand stitch it closed. And here's your completed banner. So optionally, you can add tabs to the back to hang it with loops. You could put a sleeve on the back, a quilt sleeve, and then put a bar through that. You could also just put a pin through it on the wall, however you want to display it. Here's your completed Holiday Bloom banner, presented by TommyPlaysWithFiber, and also our good friend at GrainLine Studio, Jen Beeman. Thanks for watching. So I definitely got ahead of myself a little bit, and I said that we needed to hand stitch this down. That's not true. We're actually going to stitch just around the edge here with our machine. I'm going to stitch about 1/8 of an inch away, and then I'm going to stitch about 1/4 of an inch away. So we're going to go around twice. I'm going to start at this top area to close up this hole. And go all the way down, around, go over a little bit, and then go all the way down and around again. I've changed my thread color to be gray so it matches my background. This is just how we're going to finish this edge before we do any quilting, and that's going to be up to you. Now you can see our top area has been stitched through, so we could leave it like this. If you want, you can add in some quilting on here. You could do just lines across, you could do lines straight down. Just keep in mind, if you do lines this way, it's going to compress it this way. If you do lines this way, it's going to compress it this way. So your design's going to shrink up just a little bit. But yeah, this is more or less complete. So you may have gotten this far and questioned, how am I going to hang this thing? I have it stitched all the way around. It looks nice. So once you have this finished, what we're going to need to put on here is something to hang it from. And I have some sticks. I don't have them on my person at the moment, but I know that they're rather small. So it's just a dowel rod. And I know that I can make just like enough of a loop here that something can go through it. And so what I've done is found 2 strips that I cut before. And these strips are 2.5 inches wide, and they're roughly 10 inches long. So I know I'm going to be able to get a 10-inch loop to hang things from, or I can get a 2.5-inch loop minus, whatever I sew down. And so to me, I know that that's going to be plenty. So I'm going to go ahead and make 4 loops here. And I'll make 4 just because I have the fabric. and it's easy enough. And if I mess one up, I can just throw it away. Okay, so while that heats up, we're going to just press these in half, and then we're going to fold in those edges. Sort of like we're making a bias tape, but just a double fold tape, and then we're going to fold that in on itself. Great. So, just a second. I think this is probably hot now. Okay, there's some steam. So, we'll press in half. We'll open them back up again, and we have that press line that we can use in the middle. So, just fold in both sides there. You don't have to go all the way to the middle. That'll result in a little bit wider of a strip, which might be what we want. So just work your way down. You just really want to avoid going across that middle point. Because if you do, we're going to have a little bit of extra bulk there. So it's not the most even, but it'll do. And I'll fold it back. I'll give it a deep press until it lays flat, which it does. My goodness. I have a fly in here that's just driving me nuts. Okay, so the same thing on the second piece. The scrap that I'm using just happens to be left over from making the block. So I know it matches, but I didn't want it to be the background. I wanted it to stand out just a little bit. Okay, and so now we have our two strips that have been double folded. And what we'll do is we'll sew on either side of these, close to the edge. We'll cut them into 4 chunks, and then we'll sew them to the top. Let me show you that. See, we sewed close to the edge there. That's the part I messed up. Okay, and then I'm going to fold them in half and just cut them again. And so these were about 10 inches, so I expect these to be about 5 inches. We'll probably use about an inch to sew it to the piece, so we'll end up with a 4-inch loop, which, if you remember pi, can get you a 1-inch round hole through it. So we have our piece here, and we have our 4 little tabs that we're going to turn into loops, and we're starting on the back. And so it's important that we start on the back because we want to finish stitching on the front. And what we're going to do is first stitch these to the top, just really, really close, like a 1/4 inch, and then we'll fold it over and then stitch that at more than a 1/4 inch. It's up to you, but I'll show you how to hide that. So let's first distribute these evenly across. So I'm going to put one on each end. If you decide to only make 3 loops, you can put one in the middle, I'm just going to eyeball putting these on there. I bet that's pretty good. So I'm going to pin each of these in place. You do want to make sure that they are flush with the top edge. Grab my pins. And actually, I'm going to move this one in just to that outer line of top stitching I did. That way we don't intersect it. That'll look more professional, I think. Okay, so one more to do. I'm going to move it in again, just like the other side. We'll pin it. So now I'm going to stitch 1/4 inch. I'm going to back stitch on either side of this, and I'm going to do it on this outer stitching line that already exists. So this stitching line here, I'm going to stitch along that line on here, and then I'm going to repeat it for each of these. Okay? Okay, and so we've attached the 4 tabs. Let's press them each this way. And then flip it over. And so what we'll want to do before well, let's think about this. I want to press these under by about 1/2 inch. And again, I'm just guesstimating this. Sorry, I'm out of frame. So press each of these under by 1/2 inch. Then we'll fold this so that that 1/2 inch folds just underneath the stitching line there. The same one that we stitched over before. Okay, and so now that you've pinned all these tabs down, what you'll want to do is just put a line, you'll want to make a box of stitching. Make a box of stitching that goes on the stitching line, follows both of these edge stitches, and then completes that right there. And then you can make an X in the box if you want to. You don't have to. Just make sure that you backstitch at least so that you enclose all of that area. And this gives a nice professional finish to this top bit here. Okay, so let me do one, and then I'll show you. I might actually decorate it with some of the additional features on my machine. Okay, well, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get a great view of that, but I'm going to start with the same setting that I made this edge stitch with, and make sure I'm in line with that until I get to that edge, and then I can pivot on that point and stitch across. until I hit that last edge that I did on the other. And I think my bobbin ran out. No, it didn't. Huh. My machine's acting a little funny. I'm just going to complete where I started there. Oh yeah, it's just a rogue thread and backstitch. And actually, I'm going to backstitch to the point of that corner. And I'm going to go ahead and put in a little decorative stitching. So yeah, just a couple little snowflakes up there for a little detail. So just repeat that on each of those, and then what you end up with is a nice loop here that encases those ugly bottom edges, except for that one. I guess you could stitch through here as well if you wanted to worry about that, but I kind of like it down here. So anyway, up to you. You definitely can't see that raw edge from the front, so it's hidden in the back. Anyway, let me continue on these, and then I'll show you the finished product on the stick. And there you go. Perfect. And that's how you complete the hanging aspects of the holiday bloom while hanging. Thank you for watching as always. I'll see you next time.